Have you ever had that feeling? You know, that feeling where it's like, even though we have all these gadgets and we're like super connected all the time, there's just something missing. It's
Mm,
like we're just stuck on this treadmill of information and buying stuff and consuming,
right.
but deep down, something's not right.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like a weird paradox of modern life, right? We've got all this abundance,
Yeah,
all these resources, like we said, tools and information and stuff. But so many people just feel empty, like they're missing that real deep down satisfaction.
exactly. And you know what? That's kind of what we're going to be looking at today in this deep dive.
Okay.
So we're taking a look at this really old story, the book of Exodus. I know what you're thinking. Ugh, the Bible. That's ancient history,
Right.
but stick with me here.
Yeah.
Because what if this story about escaping slavery actually gives us a way to understand some of the traps, the spiritual and societal traps that we're dealing with today?
That's a really interesting thought. And you know, the text you shared with me, it actually makes a pretty strong case for that. It draws a direct connection between the whole thing with the Israelites being slaves in Egypt and what calls this spiritual crisis and moral decline that we're seeing today.
Right.
It's basically saying that even though we have all this cool stuff and we're comfortable, our society can still feel like we're trapped, like we're slaves in a way.
Totally. And so that's what we're going to unpack today in this deep dive. We're going to get to the bottom of this comparison. We're going to look at how this argument connects the ancient world to ours.
Right.
And most importantly, we're going to figure out what it means for you listening right now, as you're trying to navigate this crazy, complicated world that we live in.
Yeah.
So
Let's do it.
let's dive in.
All right, so the text you sent me, it talks a lot about Jordan Peterson's view of the Exodus story.
Okay.
It's this like foundational story of, God against the tyrant. And what's really fascinating is how the source connects that idea to what's happening in the world today. It says that all throughout history, you've got all these societies that have been ruled by these oppressive forces.
Yeah.
And there's this pattern that keeps popping up. It's like this thing where the person who defeats the tyrant ends up becoming a new tyrant themselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like this cycle,
Yeah.
The source calls it the slayer becoming the new dragon.
Yeah.
You can think of it like all those revolutions that started with good intentions,
Right.
but they just ended up creating a new form of oppression.
Right.
And it's not just about changing who's in charge. It's about something deeper in human nature, the
Sure.
struggle with power itself,
That's a heavy thought. It kind of makes you wonder if we're just doomed to repeat these cycles of oppression over and over again,
Yeah.
even when we're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, it's a tough question. And the source then goes on to this really interesting idea about why these patterns might keep happening.
Okay.
So it says that we can actually look at the genes of ancient civilizations by looking at their origin stories.
What do you mean by genes, though? Like actual DNA?
No, not literally. It's more like a metaphor. The source uses the Mahabharata as an example.
Okay.
It talks about how there's this disrespect towards women in that story. And it suggests that these old stories, they kind of plant these seeds that we see play out in how societies behave centuries later.
Wow.
Even today, like those stories create this cultural blueprint, you
Yeah.
know? And if we don't stop and think critically about that blueprint, the problems, they just keep showing up again and again.
That's wild. So you're saying that these ancient stories aren't just entertainment. They're like, I don't know, instruction manuals for society.
In a way, yeah. And the source then goes on to use this really intense analogy.
Okay.
It compares ancient practices like human sacrifice,
Yeah.
like in the Shang dynasty and with the Mayans.
Right.
It compares that to certain problems we have in society today.
Whoa. Okay. That's a pretty big jump.
I know it sounds crazy, but the source isn't saying that they're the same thing morally. It's more about pointing out a deeper pattern. The source talks about this eating people aspect, and that might be literal in those ancient societies, but maybe it's more metaphorical today.
So like exploiting people, taking advantage of them.
Yeah, exactly. It's about how civilizations can sometimes be built on these foundations that are really messed up, even if we don't want to admit it.
That's a lot to think about. It makes you question everything.
It does. And then the source goes on to talk about the story of Noah's sons.
Okay. Shem, Japheth, and Ham.
Right, and it connects each son to a specific characteristic. Shem represents the spiritual, Japheth is linked to Europeans, and Ham is associated with Africans and Asians.
Okay. So what's the point? What's the source trying to say with this?
Well, it focuses on Ham and says he represents this bloodlust, this drive that's ruled by desires. The source calls it the tyrant within.
Interesting.
It's basically saying that these basic human tendencies You know, the spiritual, the practical, and the desire-driven. They've shown up throughout history and in different groups of people.
And Ham represents that inner struggle with our desires.
Right. And remember, this is just one interpretation. It's not a universally accepted fact or anything like that. Okay.
Got it. So it's a specific lens that the source is using to look at history and society, which is definitely interesting. So let's move on to this idea of a spiritual exodus in this inner tyrant. Can you explain what that's all about?
Yeah. So the source says that the Exodus story isn't just about breaking free from a physical oppressor like the Pharaoh.
Okay.
It's also about freeing ourselves from this tyranny inside of us.
Our own personal Pharaoh.
Exactly. It's that part of us, that animalistic soul that stops us from reaching our full potential, from becoming more divine, you know?
I like that, our own personal Pharaoh. We all have that struggle going on inside us. And that idea actually reminds me of something from Taoism.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So in Taoism, there's this idea of the original spirit. It's like this calm center that we all have inside.
Uh-huh.
And then there's this other part of us called the knowing spirit, which is like our active thinking mind, always going and going, right? And the source is basically saying that when our knowing spirit gets out of control, when we're always chasing after stuff and stimulation, it throws us off balance.
Yeah.
And that's bad news for both us as individuals and for society as a whole.
It's like that saying, the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master.
Exactly. So it's not enough to just change the world around us.
Yeah.
We have to deal with this inner Egypt, too, this spiritual exodus that the source keys talking about.
Right. And it's super important to remember that outward change has to start with inner transformation. It's like, if we're all still stuck with our inner tyrants, all those unchecked desires and bad habits.
We'll just create new problems even if we get rid of the old one.
Exactly. It's like if you move to a new house, but you bring all your baggage with you, you're still going to have the same problems, just in a different location.
Right. You can't build a healthy society out of unhealthy people.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But, you know, thinking about how much needs to change, it's kind of overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can we actually make this spiritual exodus happen?
Yeah.
Especially when it seems like so many people aren't even aware of the problem.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge. And the source talks about this idea of the collective unconscious. It's like the shared level of awareness, or lack of awareness in this case.
Right.
And it says that we need to find a good way out of this mess. But if the collective consciousness isn't ready for it, even if we have a great leader, like a Moses figure, things might not change.
That's so discouraging.
I know. But it's a reminder that we all have a part to play. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix everything. It also connects to this idea of heavenly justice that the source brings up.
Okay. What's that about?
So heavenly justice is like this cosmic principle where everything balances out in the end. Like what goes around comes around. Kind of. But it's more about this idea that if a society's values or the way it's structured are out of whack with this natural order, then any attempt to fix things that doesn't address that is going to fail. It's like you can't build a strong house on a shaky foundation.
Right. So these failed revolutions and reform movements, they weren't just bad luck. They were symptoms of a deeper problem.
Exactly. And the source is really clear about this one thing. It says that if people aren't even aware that they're enslaved in Egypt,
they'll never try to escape?
Exactly. That's the first step, the most important step, realizing that there's a problem.
Oh, wow. So basically, we have to wake up and realize that we're all living in this messed up version of Egypt, and then we have to figure out how to get out together. That's a tall order. And to be honest, the way the source describes modern Egypt, it's kind of depressing.
It's not sugarcoating things, that's for sure. It actually draws a parallel to the Exodus story. It says that even back then, only a small number of the Israelites actually left Egypt.
Seriously?
Yeah. The source says that only about 1/5 of them actually made it out.
What happened to the rest?
They were assimilated into Egyptian culture, and then when the plagues hit, they didn't survive.
Oh.
And the source is saying that a similar thing might be happening today.
Like we're being assimilated into this unhealthy way of life.
Right, and we're not even aware of it. And that connects to this feeling of loneliness that a lot of people feel these days.
Yeah, even though we're more connected than ever.
Exactly. We have tons of friends online.
Right.
But it's not the same as real human connection.
It's like we're surrounded by people but still feel totally alone.
And the source asks this really important question. Have we actually progressed in our ability to connect with each other as humans? Or have we actually gone backwards in some ways?
That's a good question. And the source also points out how messed up our relationship with food has become.
Oh, yeah. It talks about all this technology and ruthless tactics being used in food production.
Like GMOs and pesticides.
Yeah, and even further, like the way they engineer food to be addictive. And it's not just food either. It talks about cosmetics and other products that we use every day. The source is saying that all this stuff is designed to make us dependent on it.
And that's making us sick.
Right. Chronic diseases are on the rise. And the environment is getting trashed.
Yeah, it's like we've created the system that's trapping us.
Exactly. And the source uses this interesting analogy from the Exodus story. It talks about the manna that God provided for the Israelites in the desert. Remember that?
Yeah. Wasn't that like this magical bread that appeared every day?
Right. It was simple and it was enough. But the Israelites weren't satisfied. They wanted something more, so they tried to make it into cakes. And it didn't work out so well.
They messed it up.
Yeah. And the source uses this to illustrate how we as humans are never satisfied. We always want more, even when we have enough.
That's so true. Like we're constantly chasing after the next thing.
And the source is saying that this desire for more is at the root of a lot of our problems.
Like how?
Well, it leads to inequality because some people are always trying to get more than their fair share. And it also makes us sick because we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy more, eat more, do more, and it's exhausting.
It really is. And it never ends.
Right. It's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
And the source calls this a sick society. And what's even worse is that most people don't even realize how sick we are.
Yeah. It's like we've become numb to it.
And that makes it even harder to change.
So we're physically and spiritually sick. And we don't even know it.
That's the scary part. And the source connects this to a really important principle from traditional Chinese medicine and Taoism. It's this idea that the highest level of health preservation is to have a peaceful mind and few desires.
That's a beautiful quote. But how do we actually achieve that?
It's a lifelong journey for sure, but it starts with understanding that our mental and emotional health are directly connected to our physical health.
Right. It's all connected.
Exactly. And the source argues that all these mental health problems that we're seeing, like anxiety and depression, they're not just random. They're a direct result of this system that we've created.
A system based on greed and competition.
And a lack of spiritual connection.
So what's the solution? How do we get out of this Egypt?
Well, the source talks about this idea that heaven punishes by elevating before a fall.
What does that mean?
It's like when things are going really well for a long time.
Like right now.
Exactly. But that success can actually blind us to the problems that are building up beneath the surface.
So it's like we're being set up for a fall.
It's a possibility. Unless we start paying attention to the warning signs.
So what are the warning signs? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, the source points to our obsession with economic growth.
Right.
It's like we're so focused on making more money that we've forgotten about everything else that matters, like our health, our relationships, and our spirituality.
It's like we sold our souls for a quick buck.
In a way.
Yeah.
And the source suggests that this could lead to a free fall, like a big crash.
Unless we change course.
Okay, so we need to change course, but how? What's the antidote to all this madness? Well, the source really seems to resonate with this idea from Jordan Peterson that the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, it offers this crucial antidote for what's going on today.
The Old Testament. But that's like super old school.
I know, but Peterson argues that Western civilization, our prosperity, it was actually built on these biblical principles. Things like putting the good of the community first, personal integrity, and a belief in something bigger than ourselves.
Interesting.
And the source is saying that we've abandoned those principles, and that's why we're seeing all these problems.
Okay, so we need to go back to the basics, but how does that actually play out?
Well, the source talks about the role of prophets, like they're these doctors of spiritual diseases.
Okay, I like that.
They can see the sickness in our society that we can't see ourselves.
And they try to warn us.
Exactly. And the source says that the words of true prophets, they're timeless. They still apply to us today.
Even though they were written thousands of years ago.
Right. But the source also points out that we might be even worse off than ancient Israel.
You're kidding.
Because we've become so apathetic, and we're constantly doing things that hurt each other.
Like what?
It points to the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry as examples.
Okay, so big corporations putting profits before people.
Yeah. And the source says that unless we wake up and start taking responsibility for our actions,
Things are going to get really bad.
that's the message. And it comes back to the book of Exodus. It says that we need to read it with fresh eyes, like we're seeing it for the first time.
And apply its lessons to our lives today.
Exactly. The source even talks about this vision of what society could be like if we actually followed those principles.
Like what?
It talks about a world where we're all working for the common good, where everyone is honest, and where we don't even need police because we're all taking care of each other.
Wow, that sounds amazing. But is it even possible?
Well, the source acknowledges that human nature is the biggest obstacle. Our greed, our selfishness, they get in the way.
Right. It's like we're our own worst enemies.
And that brings us back to this question of how we got enslaved in the first place. The source says that the Israelites became slaves in Egypt because they started to adopt the ways of the Egyptians. They started eating unclean things.
Like what?
Well, it mentions food specifically, but I think it's also talking about ideas, beliefs, cultural influences, things that are harmful to our spiritual health.
Okay, so it's like we're being poisoned by the culture around us.
Exactly. And it connects this to the food we eat today. All the processed food,
Yeah.
the fast food, the chemicals. The source says that this is all contributing to the rise of chronic diseases.
Right. And not just physical diseases, but mental and emotional ones too.
It talks about Hollywood as a symbol of this toxic culture.
Like all the violence and materialism in movies and TV shows.
Yeah. And the source also talks about the dopamine economy.
What's that?
It's this idea that our whole world is designed to give us instant gratification.
Like through social media and video games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the source says that this is making us addicted to stimulation. We can't focus. We can't connect with each other in a meaningful way.
And it's leading to a lot of loneliness and depression.
Especially among young people.
So it's like we're trading real connection for a quick hit of dopamine.
And that's not a good trade in the long run.
And the source also points to this rise in narcissism. Like everyone's obsessed with themselves.
Right. And it argues that this self-centeredness makes it really hard to form genuine connections.
Because we're also focused on ourselves.
And it also makes it hard to take responsibility for our actions or to care about the well-being of others.
So it's like this downward spiral.
Yeah, we become more selfish, more isolated, more disconnected from reality.
And the source uses this analogy to drive the point home. It talks about remaining silent in the face of injustice.
Oh yeah. Like if we see something wrong happening, but we don't say anything.
We become part of the problem.
Exactly. And the source says that this is what's happening on a large scale today.
We're turning a blind eye to all the injustice in the world.
And it's leading to all sorts of problems,
So we're consuming this poisonous food,
both literally and metaphorically.
and it's making us sick.
Both physically and spiritually.
And we're not even aware of it.
That's the scariest part.
So we're back to square one. We're trapped in Egypt. But this time, it's an Egypt of our own making.
Right? And the source points out that even though we have all this amazing technology, all
Yeah.
this progress, we're actually more enslaved than ever before.
Because we're slaves to our own desires.
And to the system that we've created.
So what's the way out? How do we break free?
Well, the source says that it starts with recognizing the problem, waking up to the reality of our situation.
Like realizing that we're in Egypt.
Exactly. And then it's about doing the inner work, confronting our own Pharaoh.
Our own inner tyrant.
Right. And that's not easy work. It takes a lot of honesty and courage.
But it's the only way to truly be free.
And the source finds it kind of ironic that so many people are still obsessed with material wealth.
Even though it's clear that the system is broken.
Yeah, it's like they're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
So we need to shift our focus. But to what?
The source talks about the importance of developing our character, cultivating virtues like honesty, integrity, compassion.
Okay. But those sound kind of old-fashioned.
Maybe, but they're timeless principles. And the source connects these virtues to the opposite of those fools that we talked about earlier.
Those people who are so self-absorbed that they can't see the truth?
Right? And it warns against becoming complacent, being easily satisfied with superficial things.
Like instant gratification and chasing after the next shiny object.
Exactly. And it uses this phrase, fool's eyes reach to the ends of the earth.
What does that mean?
It's about this insatiable greed that we see so much of today, this constant need for more stuff, more money, more status.
It's like we're never satisfied.
And the source links this greed to anger. It says that when we're consumed by desire, we get angry when we don't get what we want,
And then anger can be really destructive.
both for ourselves and for others,
So we need to learn to control our desires.
and to cultivate contentment with what we have.
That's easier said than done, though. Especially in this world that's constantly telling us we need more.
It is a challenge. And the source talks about the importance of taking responsibility for our own spiritual journey.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means not blindly following anyone, even if they seem charismatic or have a lot of followers online.
Right. We need to think for ourselves.
Exactly. And the source talks about this danger of amnesia. It's like we forget why we keep making the same mistakes over and over.
So we're doomed to repeat them.
Unless we wake up and start paying attention.
Paying attention to what?
To our own patterns, our own thoughts and behaviors, the things that are holding us back.
And it's not easy to be good in a world that's so messed up.
It's not. But the source says that we can't give up. We have to keep fighting for what's right, even when it's hard.
So it's like a constant battle.
Yeah, a battle against our own inner demons and against the forces of darkness in the world.
And the source connects this battle to an ancient prophecy.
Right, the prophecy of straitened times. It's a time when people will turn away from God and they'll worship idols instead.
Like money and fame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the sources that we're living in those times right now?
So we're headed for disaster.
Unless we change course.
Yeah, how do we do that?
Well, the source points to the wisdom of the ancient sages. They taught us to detach from material possessions.
Okay.
And to focus on developing our spiritual side.
So it's like an inner exodus.
Exactly. And the source says that this is the only way to find true freedom and happiness.
And to survive the coming storm.
Right. The source also talks about the importance of holiness and how difficult it is to achieve in a world that's so polluted.
Polluted in what way?
Well, it talks about physical pollution, but also spiritual pollution.
Like all the negativity and violence in the world.
Yeah, and it says that this pollution makes it really hard to connect with God.
Or with our higher selves.
And it distinguishes between true spiritual insight and what it calls the second world of illusion.
Okay.
It's like this realm of fake spirituality, where people are chasing after psychic powers and quick fixes.
Instead of doing the real work.
Exactly. And the source warns about the dangers of getting caught up in that kind of stuff.
So we need to be careful about who we listen to.
And what we believe.
And the source uses this story about 4 sages to illustrate this point.
Oh yeah, the story of the 4 who entered paradise.
And only 1 came back.
Right. And it's a reminder that even the most advanced spiritual seekers can get lost. So we need to be really humble and cautious.
Especially in a world where there's so much misinformation out there.
And the source also talks about how few people actually study the original sacred texts anymore.
Like the Bible and the Tao Te Ching?
Yeah, and it says that this is a problem because we're losing touch with the source of wisdom.
And we're relying on these quick and easy answers that we find online.
Which are often superficial and misleading.
So we need to do our own research.
And be critical thinkers.
And not just accept everything we hear at face value.
Right. And this brings us to this idea of instant gratification, which is so pervasive in our culture.
We want everything now.
Money, success, enlightenment.
It's like we've lost the ability to wait.
And the source says that this desire for instant gratification is actually a form of greed.
Because we're not willing to put in the effort.
And we're not willing to trust the process.
So we end up settling for these quick fixes that don't really work.
And that can actually harm us in the long run.
So we need to cultivate patience.
And perseverance.
And be willing to work for what we want.
Both materially and spiritually.
And not expect overnight results.
Right. And the source talks about how genuine knowledge is like a seed.
It takes time to grow.
And it needs the right conditions, like good soil, sunlight, and water.
And that's true for spiritual growth, too.
Exactly. We need to nourish our souls with the right kind of food.
Like wisdom and virtue.
And we need to be patient and persistent in our practice.
So it's not about finding a quick fix.
It's about embarking on a lifelong journey of transformation.
And the source also points out how common it is for people to claim to have achieved spiritual awakening.
Especially online.
But it warns against believing everything we hear.
Because true spiritual masters are often humble and quiet.
They don't need to brag about their accomplishments.
And the source uses the example of Lao Tzu,
who said, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know."
Wow, exactly. And it contrasts this with the arrogance of those who claim to have all the answers.
Even though they're just scratching the surface.
And it warns against following those who are half empty.
Meaning they don't have a full understanding themselves.
But they're still trying to teach others.
That's dangerous.
It is. And it can lead us astray.
So we need to be discerning
and skeptical.
And rely on our own intuition.
And the source emphasizes the importance of humility.
Like recognizing how much we don't know.
And being willing to learn.
And it contrasts this with the pride and arrogance that we see so much of today.
Especially online.
And it brings up the example of Moses,
who is said to be the most humble man on earth.
So humility is a sign of true greatness.
And it's essential for spiritual growth.
So we've talked about the problem. And we've talked about the solution, but what about the consequences of not changing our ways?
Well, the source says that those who act without knowledge or wisdom, they're going to face negative consequences.
Like what?
It mentions the link between pride and anger.
Like those people who are always angry and lashing out at others.
Yeah, and it says that this anger is a sign of spiritual sickness.
So we need to learn to control our anger.
And to cultivate compassion and understanding.
And the source emphasizes the importance of self-reflection instead of blaming others for our problems.
Right, we need to take responsibility for our own actions.
And try to understand why we do the things we do.
And it talks about the danger of evil speech.
Like gossip and slander.
Yeah, and even just talking too much.
So we need to be mindful of our words.
And use them for good.
And the source outlines 4 root causes of spiritual decline.
Right, it connects them to the 4 elements.
Okay, what are they?
Fire represents pride and arrogance.
Okay.
Wind represents evil speech.
Okay.
Water represents lust and desire.
Okay.
And earth represents depression and despair.
Wow, that's a pretty comprehensive list.
And the source says that these 4 negative traits are rampant in our society today.
So we're in a state of spiritual crisis.
It seems that way.
And the source connects this to potential future disasters.
Like economic collapse or natural disasters.
And it says that these disasters might actually be a form of spiritual cleansing, like a spiritual baptism.
Exactly. Like the plagues of Egypt.
Which were a judgment against the idols that the Egyptians worshipped.
And the source says that we're worshiping idols today too.
Like money and fame.
And technology and comfort.
So we're setting ourselves up for a fall.
Unless we change our ways.
So what's the way out?
The source says that we need to start by developing our character.
Okay.
Cultivating virtues like honesty, integrity, and compassion.
And we need to be humble.
And recognize how much we don't know.
And be willing to learn.
And to work hard.
And to be patient.
And to have faith.
Faith in what?
In ourselves. In humanity. In something bigger than ourselves.
And the source suggests that we can find guidance in the wisdom of the ancient sages.
Like those who wrote the Bible and the Tao Te Ching.
And that we need to be careful about who we listen to.
Because there are a lot of false prophets out there.
So we need to be discerning.
And trust our own inner compass.
And the source ends with this powerful reminder. Heaven helps those who help themselves.
So it's up to us to take action.
To make the changes we need to make.
To free ourselves from Egypt.
So that's it for this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's been a pretty intense journey.
It has.
But I found